Okay. Well, thank you so much. And hello, everyone. Welcome to our Community College STEM Network webinar. My name is Maria Luz Espino, and I'm currently a postdoctoral researcher at the Education and Employment Center at Rutgers University. And I'm a very proud member of the CCSN. And a little bit about us and a little bit about our group. The CCSN is a group of researchers and practitioners working to generate and share research on community college student STEM pathways. We have this ongoing webinar series, as you all know, to really foster that relationship, to be able to provide research projects, partnerships, and overall focus on understanding how low-income academically talented students navigate pathways in STEM, and that's STEM education and in STEM fields. If you are not aware, we do record these webinars, and it will be shared with you all to watch at a later time in case you all need to reference this in the future. If you do have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to drop them in the chat that I will be monitoring, and we will be able to address them during our Q&A. And throughout the time, please feel free, if anything pops up, feel free to throw it in there because I will be able to bring that conversation back as we turn around towards the end of our conversation today. I have the amazing privilege to be able to introduce this month's webinar presenters. Our first up is Dr. Pamela Eddy, is the Associate Provost of Faculty Affairs and Faculty Development and a Professor of Higher Education and Educational Policy, Planning, and Leadership at William & Mary. Her research interests include community college leadership and development, organizational change and educational partnerships, gender roles in higher education, and faculty development. Professor Eddy serves as a consultant for campuses, system offices, and unfunded grants regarding strategies to support community college student success and to promote educational development. Dr. Eddy is an editor-in-chief for the New Directions of Community Colleges and serves on editorial boards for the Community College Journal of Research and Practice, the Journal of Women and Gender in Higher Education, and Innovative Higher Education. Our second panelist today is Dr. Ellen Iverson, is the director of the Science Education Research Center, also known as SERC, a grant-funded office of Carleton College that has worked with over 300 education projects across the STEM disciplines and engaged with more than 1,400 institutions of higher education. She has been the evaluator or educational researcher for more than 40 NSF-funded initiatives, including STEM projects and professional development projects aimed at two-year faculty. Her research interests focus on the role of professional development and communities of practice in curriculum, policy, and programs, particularly those aimed at broadening access. And last but not least, Kristin O'Connell is an evaluation and education associate in SERC. O'Connell has more than 10 years of experience evaluating, researching, and developing higher education programs designed to improve undergraduate teaching and learning and student outcomes. Her research and evaluation have included looking at the mechanisms that drive change with a focus on the effectiveness of professional development and curriculum development programs to increase evidence-based teaching practices. And of course, our moderator today is Dr. Debra Bragg, who is a huge part of our CCSN network. So I will hand it off.
Thank you, Maria. It's a pleasure to get an opportunity to work with you and everybody in the CCSN. I see a number of our colleagues are here with us, so thank you so much, fellow researchers and practitioners who are part of the CCSN team. See other friends too, who I think will recognize as we kind of go along here. I just have to say this project was one I was also involved in as the external evaluator, but I'm going to kind of step back and play moderator today and let my fellow teammates share an incredible wealth of information in a very short amount of time. So we'll do our best. So let's go to the next slide. All right, we're going to kick this thing off just by talking just for a minute about what the heck is SAGE 2YC. A great acronym, but maybe not entirely clear what that might mean. So I'm going to ask Ellen, Dr. Iverson, to share just a little bit about the project.
Sure. So supporting and advancing geoscience educators at two-year colleges was an NSF-funded initiative. It started with a series of workshops, and the program we're going to be talking about today was a more extended program dealing with multiple cohorts of two-year college faculty. First, the first two cohorts were in the geosciences, then expanded beyond that. And we were really the program was focusing on improving the practices both for the individual faculty and acting as change agents to look at programmatic and departmental change, focusing on improving student success, transfer, career pathways, and broadening participation. And we have a QR code on the next slide that you can go to get an access to the website for more information.
Yeah. We can go to the next slide, Maria. So here we're just showing you kind of what those major foci of SAGE 2YC were about. And I also want to recognize that Heather McDonald, our grand poobah principal investigator, is here with us. So Heather, it's so great to see you. You're here with us today. Can we go to there's Heather. It's been a while, Heather. It's great to see you. Let's go to the next slide, Maria. One of the things that was a little bit unusual about this project, and I have to give a lot of credit to Dr. McDonald and her vision of what this rather major National Science Foundation project, multi-year, multi-million-dollar commitment of NSF, what this would really become. And part of that vision was that we would have a substantial focus on research and evaluation, probably a little bit more than we typically see in STEM grants. But we think that also gave us an opportunity to do a lot of experimentation, a lot of learning, a lot of, just trying out some innovative approaches to research and evaluation. So I'm going to ask Pam just to share a little bit. We're going to get to the results, but here we're kind of going to tell you, what did we do? What were we looking at in the research piece, Pam?
Yeah. So we affectionately called ourselves the ERI team. And as Debra was indicating, there was a lot of cross-collaboration in this. I served as the researcher on this project, and it was especially interesting to look at something that had such a longitudinal time frame that was involved. It gave us a chance to really see the arc of growth over time. I noticed several of our change agents are also in the room, so I really appreciate them coming, and really am proud to represent the hard work that they did. In the research side, we really did look at some of that faculty growth in terms of their own learning and some of the outcomes they were able to have in their classrooms. You're going to see in some of the further slides some of the major findings of this. I think the one that I would like to call out in particular, because it was voiced over and over again, is the role of the increase of confidence of the faculty that participated, not only in their instructional practices, also with how they started viewing themselves as faculty leaders. So person after person would talk about the things that they were able to do. And I think it's summed up by one comment at the end of the project where someone said, well, when they're asking, will someone take on this project or lead, I raise my hand now. So I think that's really a good sign of success.
Yeah, thank you. And Ellen and Kristin, would you want to share what the internal evaluation, what we were doing there?
Sure. So the internal evaluation, we really focused on that, what the faculty development component. And I think when we get into the findings in the model, you'll see a little bit more about that. But we were really looking at what Pam said one of the results was, is the shifts in confidence. What were the changes in knowledge, attitudes, skills by the individual faculty within their own practice and in their program and in their department?
Great. And just going back, the external evaluation, I know it's a lot. The external evaluation was really looking at what changes were being made by the faculty in their courses. We documented changes in over 300 courses. And we documented changes in student success in comparison to non-change agent faculty. So we did see real change, and that was an important part of the external evaluation. We also did social network analysis, and we saw the linkages and network continue to grow and blossom, and we saw these leaders pop up as real resources in the network. So that was a lot of fun as well. Now we can go on, Maria. So next question is, what are some of the major findings from this study? And I think, Pam, we tagged you to start this.
Yep, if you want to switch to the next slide, it'll give me a good way to talk to some of our talking points. If you can move that on, Maria. There we are. So we tried to really focus for this presentation on some of the high-level pieces to report out to you. When I say there's hundreds of pages of reporting and documentation in there, it's really no exaggeration. You'll also find when you go to the SAGE-2IC site, a number of the articles that we've written coming off of the data and research on this. So we really looked at what are some of the ways that not only the change agents could have findings from the study that transferred to their own practice, but also institutions. So the professional development model that was developed is something that campuses can do on their own. And so we've written a bit about how that could be replicated in very different ways. The other part was looking at how do we have a focus on intentionality within the project so that we would bring in certain pieces of background information. There's tons of information on research on what are best teaching practices. So we really instilled this notion of how do you look at evidence-based research to be able to draw that into your practice. So it begins developing a habit of mind as well, not only with the change agents, but their larger communities on campus. And then trying to understand, as Debra indicated, some of the downstream effects of the program on student success, student outcomes, and then also changes that we were able to see in the individual faculty that were involved. Several of the faculty in the first cohort were observed at the beginning of the project to look at how high their student-centered learning was in their teaching, and then looked at again and observed after they had spent time in the SAGE-2IC program. And we saw substantial growth with a focus on student-centered learning from the faculty that had participated in the professional development sessions. You go to the next slide. Here are, again, some QR codes that will lead you to some additional resources here. So looking at how faculty were taught to be able to understand the data, not only in their classroom, but largely at the institution as well. And then how you have an inquiry mindset when you're looking at this. How do we see and document improvements at that faculty level? So the faculty were exposed to trainings on that and then had that as one of the findings from this. We really looked as well at how this was being diffused. So the idea of capacity building looks at the ways in which the change agents that participated in the program had influence on their colleagues in their unit and then also in their campus and region. One of the activities that the change agents engaged in were either doing regional workshops or workshops on their campus. Because of the fact that they were then in that position of leading on their campus, they had opportunities to practice their leadership, really understand the strategies that they were talking about, and then again, diffuse the information to larger audiences, which was really critical in this. The social network analysis that Debra indicated was also a key finding that we saw, was that the group of the cohorts and cross cohorts were able to develop collaborations. It gave them, in essence, like a red hotline phone that they could call to say, I'm having an issue. Gosh, I know my colleague is over 3 states from me and I know them from this program. So they had someone that they could tap into, that they felt like anytime they had a challenge, they'd be able to talk about. We also saw this network expanding in ways with leadership roles in various professional associations and on campus. So, next slide.
Yeah. Yeah, so those give you a little bit of a taste of part of the findings, some of the most important findings that have to do with faculty. We now wanted to spend just a moment talking about the theory of change. This is a really important and interesting aspect to this project, and we've asked Kristin O'Connell to share some of her good work with the theory of change.
Yeah, so I know people talk about theories of change in many different ways, so I wanted to just ground that. So in my perspective, we see sort of a logic model as a way to document what a program is doing, right? Their activities and products and outcomes, and that's sort of the what is the program. And then we get to the theory of change, and we're really thinking about, well, how and why is this program working? What are the mechanisms that are leading to these changes? And there's a number of different ways that can be really useful. So at the beginning of a program, a theory of change can help to sort of explicate why are you designing the program the way that you're designing it, and why do you think it'll work? This could be based on evidence from prior projects. It could be bringing in published research and other theories. It could be talking with colleagues about their prior work and evidence that this might lead to the thing you're trying to do. And doing that exercise at the beginning of a project can really help identify holes in your approach or differences of opinions among team members. And working through those issues can really result in strengthening aspects of your program and making them more likely to succeed. The other really nice thing of doing this at the beginning of a project is that once you have your hypothesis about how the program will work, you can think about, well, how are we going to know if that works? And that's where the research and evaluation can really be tuned to make sure that you're measuring things that will help you understand if the program is working the way you think it is. And so that can be a really nice piece of a theory of change at the beginning of a program. However, we all know that as a program unfolds, it's not always implemented exactly the way we think it's going to be. And even if it is, you may start finding from your evaluation and research that the program is working differently than you expected. So it could be that there are aspects you don't realize were important that participants are saying is really a central experience, and you have to rethink what aspects of the how and the why. So a theory of change can evolve, and that is really helps to deepen your understanding of the way that this program is actually implemented and playing out in your context. And it may be that, how you thought it was going to work isn't. And the main point here is, as it evolves, you're rooting that in your own data and observations and research. And in fact, in SAGE, we did both of those things. So we started with a theory, and it changed multiple times over the programs as we understood more. And if you wanted to go to the next slide, this is a lot going on, and we're not going to break apart every bit. But I wanted to highlight a couple of the things that you heard Pam talk about that were really important findings that we didn't necessarily think about in that way at the beginning. For instance, you'll see on the left side these nested gray circles representing a participant's prior experience and their own context. So it became clear that one of the reasons that the SAGE program was working was that participants were all beginning from different points, but that the way it was moving forward, you were able to bring participants along regardless of where they were coming from to start. So that was a critical piece of the program. Another that you heard Pam talk about was that the professional development program was with their peers, and you had people to talk to, or you were learning together, and then you were able to practice those pieces and incrementally. And this was a very iterative process, so that even though big changes happened by the end of the program for an individual, you didn't have to do it all at once. You could try something out, come back and talk with your peers, try it again, think about starting in your classroom, starting where you're at in the context that makes the most sense, and then moving up to thinking about talking with your colleagues in your program and at your institution and in the region. So this model that we ended up with is trying to highlight those pieces and really has embedded in it many social science theories of why that's working. But in the end, we can see how the evaluation and research was able to do this because it was measuring things in a way that let us see those mechanisms.
I'll jump in here, because in looking over, preparing and looking over a report, something struck me as interesting that reinforces exactly what Kristin just said. The project had, I think, ultimately 4 cohorts. Is that correct? My involvement was just with the first 2 cohorts, but when we look at the changes that were made in the courses by just between cohort 1 and cohort 2, in cohort 1, we saw a lot of experimentation, a lot of attempts to change, and we did see change and increases in student outcomes. But what's interesting is then when cohort 2 came along, it seems that we had learned in cohort 1 what some of those changes were, that the faculty change agents were really seeing some, seeing some success. And in cohort 2, we actually saw not as many, not as broad a range of changes, but really intentional changes. And the interesting thing is, we also saw more positive change in student success. So you really saw in the data that the change agents were learning, we were learning, the PI team was learning, and we were sharing and networking and passing along through this, really learning network, what changes really make a difference. And those change agents worked together to share that knowledge. And then we measured that and could document that really indeed was what was happening. And I don't know about you all, but as an educator, it doesn't get much better than that. That was a pretty incredible thing to see. So just a little addition. We can, do any of my colleagues, we have time. This was such an important part of our work. Pam or Ellen, do you want to add anything, or we can also move on?
Well, I would say this model has influenced how I look myself at other development opportunities. And I was on a call earlier today where our institution is going to develop a leadership fellow program. And I happened to have the change model on my computer. So I shared it within that meeting to say we need to be thinking of the places in which we're going to allow these leadership fellows a chance to practice some of this. How are we going to have intentionality around the networking and the building of community as well? So the application of this model in particular, I think, has really a lot of opportunity to inform how we do programming in so many ways. And so trying to be able to discern what those key elements were. And again, it at one point had a lot of the theories that we were using, and we had to really think clearly on how do we simplify this, which you looking at it may not feel this is simplified. However, it's actually quite simplified over what we had started with, because we had become so embedded in what we were learning of seeing theory and practice here. So this whole notion of social cognition as a critical element for learning shows up in this PD, how you're having a chance to learn about it, how you're having a chance to question it. The idea of that application as well is an important part of it. So that instead of being what I would consider like a sit and get type of a professional development opportunity, this was really becoming immersed in the ideas and then having these chances to think and do on your own. And the other part of this, I think that's important to recognize, and Debra alluded to this, is that some of the changes the change agents made initially didn't go well. And so they had to learn how to use them and apply them better. And when we had a professional development session that talked about change theory and the idea of an implementation dip when you're trying something new, it really gave the change agents a different way of thinking of any kind of ways that things didn't work how they thought. And it was one that could encourage them to say, oh, that's normal. If that's normal, then I'm okay. I'll keep trying, versus saying, I must have done something wrong. I'm really bad at this. I'm going to go back to doing lectures all day. So I think the idea of giving the faculty change agents language to use in ways that expanded their understanding of adult learning theory, change theory, social cognition that we knew about. We didn't use those words always with them, but it was a way to explain it such that they could take real advantage of that. So I think the change model really touches so many corners of the project that we did. And frankly, we could talk all day about this to go through each of them. I think that the practice piece, we really can't underestimate with it. And we think of then how that applied for the faculty experience, how they then thought about it with their student experience. So we did lots of work on active learning strategies. And so the PIs in particular were very good at modeling the type of strategies that we were informing the change agents about. So I think that's an added dimension here that makes this particular project different than others that I've worked on.
All right, well, let's go to the next slide. So another really important part of SAGE 2YC was this connection between research and practice. And there are even some more ways that the project really disseminated and shared and encouraged learning with the geoscience community beyond the individuals that were involved in the grant. So there's a lot of sharing that happened there that we'll talk about, but the professional community was also involved in learning as we were going along with SAGE 2YC. So I think Ellen and maybe Kristin or whoever wants to jump in. So the next slide, please.
Sure, I can start, and I think Pam might chime in as well. So we alluded to this in the theory of change that you just saw, that what is sort of some of the research and the evidence that was grounding what was done in SAGE 2IC, and the adult learning theory and situated cognition were really key. And so if you're not as familiar, it's the pieces that we were talking about, that the learning is really situated in their context, understanding the community college context, and then it's social. So the peer learning was absolutely critical, and then it's also distributed. So they are not just learning as individuals and not just spreading the effect within their departments and in their region, but as a network itself. As Pam mentioned, modeling the evidence-based pedagogy was absolutely critical. So Heather and her team not only developed models that could be adapted, but the way the workshops were run and it used the same pedagogy. So you weren't listening, like we're not doing that right now. We're talking heads, but that was very much different in how these workshops happened, providing those curated resources. So they didn't just come and interact and do this, but then they could take that and bring it back to their region and their campus. And then I think I'm going to pass it back to Pam to talk about the leadership theory, which is absolutely critical for how change agent we're thinking about in programs today.
Sure. Thanks, Ellen. We did a number of leadership sessions throughout the various cohorts, and the last cohort actually had a very particular focus specifically on leadership. And in the same ways that the PIs were modeling some of the evidence-based practice, what we tried to convey about the leadership aspect of this was essentially, you too can be a leader, faculty can be leaders, and showing the ways and giving tools and language to the change agents was really important. So one of the tools we used was Bowman and Deal's organizational frames, and having the ability to understand and assess where am I as a change agent located with my preferences, and how does that set me up for interactions with individuals that might have different perspectives is really important. We had one change agent who liked this so much, she asked me for a copy of the instrument, and any committee she's on her campus now, she has that committee take the instrument, so she knows straight away, all right, you like this particular frame, I need to interact with you in this way, because that's going to be the way you have a preference. And so what we saw over time as part of the research is that the faculty started predominantly using one frame and then moved to two or multiple frames. The research on leadership will show that occurs for presidential leaders over a career where they're expanding in that way. And in particular, community college presidents tend to use a multi-frame perspective. So giving the change agents the language for this, allowing them that opportunity for self-assessment was helpful. One of the other sessions we did for the change agents was how to get others to follow along with your projects and bringing them along. And we did some role modeling and case studies for this. And it was really helpful for them as they would prepare to go and have conversations with their deans or their grant officers to pitch ideas or to talk about why someone should support the program that they were doing, because they had that chance to practice it, and they also had that chance to understand what are some strategies that are going to help with building these kind of collaborations. So again, I think it's been something that's useful for the change agents in particular, coming out of a STEM discipline. It's not as if they would have typically been exposed to any leadership theory. Go to the next slide, Maria. So some of the tangible ways that we saw different projects emerging out of this was certainly this professional development model that I mentioned before. And we do have an article in New Directions that talks about that model, and in particular, how that model was helpful during COVID. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that, because I think it's a piece that's really handy for a ready application with it. Because we had so much with the curated resources, it provides the change agents and anyone with access to this website the ability to go in and see some ready-made things. So you're going to see on the next couple pages QR codes that are going to link you directly to some of those outcomes. The Scientist Spotlight is something that was really popular. This active learning resource list was also a popular one for our change agents. Looking at developing inclusive teaching practices was something that was in many of the change agents' wheelhouse already. What they were able to expand on was understanding more about the role of metacognition and how that would be more inclusive. What are the ways using the Scientist Spotlight that you might highlight historically marginalized populations? So those resources really mattered because they didn't have to search them out. And so I think that curated portion of this ends up being important as well. And then finally, as I mentioned, the idea of the regional workshops was a forum in which the faculty could be telling others about this and get to practice themselves of being a leader and in front of a group. And what they were able to do in those sessions in some ways was replicate some of the programming they had received at these national convenings and the continuous online learning that they had. So they were able to share with others in a very distinct way and bring others into this kind of network to help them change their own practice. The next slide. Then Ellen, I'll pop this back to you to talk about some of the examples.
Sure. So on one of the earlier slides where we had QR codes, some of the QR codes, if you went to them, were not things directly in SAGE, but we're looking at the lasting influence of SAGE. And so here's another story of this sort of lasting influence of how and in bringing this research to practice. So as Pam mentioned, metacognition was of high interest. And Sandra McGuire was part of one of the earlier workshops. In some of the ways that we put what they were learning into their actual practice is the program itself had the instructors journaling reflections as a practice, and then implementing student reflections as a practice. And we you can have a link to one of the SAGE resources as the QR code. So the idea of metacognition and then Scientist Spotlight was the other piece that Pam mentioned that was coming out of cutting research and putting that into practice. And they discussed this as a journal club, some of the resources, the evidence that comes behind using this practice, and how could they strengthen their own ways of implementing it. They had poster presentations where they talked about what they were doing with Scientist Spotlights. I talked to someone just at the Geological Society of America meeting last month about how they were still using it on their campus and what they had done to continue to further that practice. What is really nice is that spread of effect has really promoted this practice with other projects and other practitioners. So there's a link to another curriculum project that's aimed at introductory courses in science for pre-service teachers. And they adapted the idea of Scientist Spotlight and also the community of practice. And one of the things they learned through their own reflections and then their student reflections was where students are seeing it as connecting and resonating with them, and putting an emphasis on the accomplishment of the scientists in the spotlight and not only their hurdles, because you don't want students to take away from this, oh, I identify with them and look at all the stuff I'd have to put up with to get to that point, but instead on the accomplishments. And this was a combination of thinking about the student metacognition and also the instructor reflection. And they actually ended up taking that and updating the curriculum to put a practice in place, really focusing on the student part of that, which is the third link. So I really thought it was a tribute to this project to think about those two pieces. And I've been able to see this sort of lasting influence on this broader community, which is really, really nice.
Next slide, Maria. One of the things I wanted to share, and I also want to give Heather McDonald just a moment to pop in here, Heather, if you're willing to do that. If not, it's fine too, but I want to invite you to do this. One of the things I did want to share, an audience we really haven't talked about, but was really important for us to share, is our own peers of researchers and evaluators in the STEM space. We conducted sessions at the American Educational Research Association meeting, at the Council for the Study of Community Colleges meeting, and we talked about this research and generated, I think, quite a bit of conversation and kind of buzz about how do you think about really getting up close and personal with change in the practice space. And I just have very fond memories, as you all were talking, about a conversation we had that kind of stretched some of our peers when we talked about faculty leaders. And it was so interesting. Even some of our peers, I would say, think about administration. And yet we were challenging them to say leadership is much more inclusive. It's much more about a process than about position. And that was really fun to think about. So Heather, please, thank you so much again for being here, and share anything you'd like to share.
Well, one of the things I would really like to share is how absolutely terrific having the ERI team, as they were affectionately called, as part of the project. And I think if we were to go back and look at the proposal and look at how we ended, the resulting work, which I think was amazing in part because the ERI team were willing to share their ideas and talk to people who didn't really know that much about theories of change and some of the evaluation things. And because we had a better understanding of that and the ideas and the depth of their knowledge and wisdom and experience, we changed things in the project that one could trace back to the expertise that they brought. And I think, to me, that's a really neat lesson to share of the value of having a very rich and big, we were really lucky, team, and the way that one can, we could learn from them, and I think they learned from us as well. So I think in other projects, when you can have that kind of interaction and willingness to learn from each other, and I think that's terrific.
Thank you, Heather. I know I speak for all of us to say we feel the same way. We all learned a lot. So now's our time to open things up, and here's some of your questions. So feel free to unmute and just jump in here, anybody. We do have some other faculty change agents here too, so please don't be shy. I could start naming names. We would love to hear your impressions of this experience and what you learned.
I can jump in and ask a question if possible.
That'd be great.
Sure. I had a question. What advice do you have for a person who's new to this, who's actually the fan of this work? And I just got funding to start doing this kind of work at my institutions, and I heavily relied on SAGE 2IC project and the papers to get this funding. What are some of the I don't want to say misstep, but some of the challenges you've encountered early on in the process that, as a pre-mortem, you tell me these are things we've learned in that first year doing this work? Thank you.
I'll jump in with one thing, and I think Heather in some ways alluded to it as we were working with the dynamics of coming out of the social sciences with leadership theory and evaluation and working with PIs that were in the sciences. How we talk to one another had to evolve over time to be able to have what we in the social sciences would think of as, doesn't everyone know this? Doesn't everyone know adult learning theory? And so one of the things we learned quickly was, no, in fact, not everyone knows that. And so really working hard to bridge across and within to be able to create that kind of shared knowledge and really language about it as well. I think that was really critical for the long-term success of this, so that it was not a project where you had, for example, an external evaluator that just sort of was outside the bubble and said, what's going on? I'll look at it. And instead was really involved step by step. I think that was one of the things that happened quickly in the project. And one thing that I think is important as you work with bringing new teams of people together is sharing that knowledge.
Mm-hmm. The other thing I would add, thank you for that, Pam. Another thing I would add was alluded to earlier, but has to do with giving people a chance to share with one another and sharing, what we think is our best guess. I mean, we're all, to some extent, experimenting when we start a big project like this. And we're guided by theory and our own practice and knowledge, but you never know how it's going to go. And being patient and supporting one another to let a project evolve and learn from that project is super important. Being open to mistakes and learning that those need to change. We can change. That's part of what we do. We haven't talked a lot about the action plans that the teams put together, but that became a formal part of the planning process. What was so great for us as researchers and evaluators is those templates enabled us to really look at those first best guesses. And then a year later, the modifications that were made, and we tracked those over time and really did see how people were learning and changing. So, understanding this is just a great big giant learning project and that things will evolve, and being able to really track and think about that together is so critically important. And sometimes that does not happen in projects like this, from my experience. So that's quite unique. Let's see.
Thank you for the question. We do have 2 questions in the chat. Lindsay asks, can you speak to any outside of the classroom practices, in parentheses, co-curriculars, you found were beneficial to students?
Mm-hmm.
So I could start, but Heather's also there, so no? Okay. So we have one of the ways that the evaluation looked at it was we developed with the leaders a departmental program inventory. Originally, we were looking at shifts at the program level, like outside of classroom shifts. And it ended up being more reflective instrument, more so than being able for us to use it as evaluative data. But some of the strategies and being able to do site visits, we were really able to see this as how they were developing clubs outside of the classes, how they were managing student advising, and like even the bulletin boards for how they were looking promoting research opportunities that might happen, developing partnerships with four-year colleges in order to do that. In the geosciences, some of it was field work. So they had like developed urban field camps so that they were in a really urban area and the students weren't going to be able to go do this 4-week piece, and they wanted to give them some field experience. They were trying to look at opportunities like that. But we really could see there was a site visit where they had got an outside grant, and they developed in the building itself, like the wall was like this was a geoscience wall, so you could look at Earth history over time. And so it was really visible to the students, and this helped for early recruiting into the programs. So I think it was the advising, the transfer, and thinking about how to promote at a program level, the inclusiveness through visible things in the hallway, in how they interacted with the students at a program level as well. And those were also all coming out of it. I don't know if that's what you had in mind for outside of classroom.
That picture of that wall is somewhere on the Sage 2IC site, and Ellen and I were at that campus. If I were a returning student to a community college, I would be a geoscientist, almost surely based on looking at this wall. It was really a way to symbolize a lot of the work. And the students, again, talked a lot about the hands-on aspect of it. I thought I would take a stab at this next question that is in there about incremental change versus deep change, second order. We saw evidence of some second order change, in particular, this idea of questioning assumptions, so that when some of the change agent teams looked at their course level data and they were discovering equity gaps, they took initiatives to be able to redesign syllabi, to be able to have better supporting language in there. They tracked those equity gaps over time, and then also spread some of that learning that they had been doing on a personal and team level to a larger campus level. So the idea of having the faculty be able to question some of the assumptions about teaching was already an evidence of some of that second order change.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would also say the incremental piece of that was, I think, really core, because you could build up confidence and never feel so far out of your, depths that you didn't want to do it. So the motivation and the confidence went hand in hand with those incremental changes, which eventually led to those second order changes.
Mm-hmm. When I hear this, it triggered for me our use of developmental evaluation as just a really, really important way to think about our work as researchers and evaluators. Those of you who do this, play those roles, who are on the webinar today, will quickly recognize this doesn't sound a lot like research that I was taught in grad school. This is like really evolving, constantly sort of changing how we think about our approach, because we have to be responsive to change, because that's what this is about. So we would really encourage you to take a really good look at some of the newer models and approaches to evaluation, like developmental evaluation, which was, there's also principle-focused evaluation. Both of those, Michael Patton is quite a strong leader in our field, and we really value what we learned and how we began to think together about how we approached research and evaluation. Do we have any more questions? We have a little more time, so don't be shy.
Heather, is there anything you would add that we're missing?
Well, I don't think you're missing anything, but I think one thing I could add was sort of very briefly, the question about the co-curriculars, and this is not actually a co-curricular response, but I think the focus, one of the foci of the project was having participants think about facilitating students' professional development. And so the ways that a focus in the introductory science classroom on developing students' career pathways which had ramifications beyond the classroom, I think was one nice example.
Yeah.
Yes.
I guess one last piece about the second order change also is that we haven't even mentioned that there were also administrators involved in the program for each of the change agents institutions, and that their involvement in many cases helped move things to a more institutional level. Change agents were being tapped in other departments and were able to ask questions about how their work aligned with institutional priorities and things, and that also helped drive some of the second order changes.
Mm-hmm. I would underscore too that the collaboration among the team was really good intellectual fun. Sometimes you think these are all okay. I'm putting my head down and I'm doing my task as the researcher or the evaluator. And it really was a space for learning as a group with the ERI team as well. And I think that's something that is very unique to this project in particular. So moving forward, trying to think of where you might find that kind of intellectual space for some of the PIs and the evaluators and the leaders of it, I think can be really an important aspect too.
Yeah, subtext to what Dr. Eddy just said is Heather McDonald spoiled us forever. It really was a wonderful project. So I'm going to thank you all for being here. Thank you to the panel. Thank you to Heather for envisioning this and bringing us together. Thank you to Maria and Tracy for making this happen, and our good friend Michelle Van Noy at Rutgers, who wasn't able to be here. We're thinking about you, Michelle. So thank you all for joining us. I'll turn it back to Maria.
Yes, and as we wrap up, please be ready for our next upcoming webinar in December. We will be having a conversation with Dr. Becky Packard, which I'm super excited about, thinking about mentorship and, again, those practices of what we're doing, how we're navigating these spaces with STEM students, and being able to go above and beyond, not just theory, but also how we implement it on the ground floor, how our students are learning from it, etc. So this is our next webinar. Please feel free to look at your email when we send out this recording. The registration link will also be in that same email, so please keep an eye out for that. And then thank you, as Deb said, first, thank you to the panelists. Thank you, Deb, for doing a great job moderating. And if you want to hear more about what we're doing as a CCSN and kind of involved more with our panelists and people that come to our webinars, please scan the QR code, get more information that way, and you'll be able to get in contact and reach out, as Dr. Eddy has posted in the chat. Reach out if there's any other questions that you have. They are more than willing to have that conversation with you all and see how you move forward your STEM initiatives as well. So have a great day, have a great Friday, and hopefully see you at our next webinar.
Thank you, Maria.
So long.